looking at that, I want to invest in myself and I want to, become a better version of myself, then we probably won't look at that as a huge cost. Rather, I would look at as a investment, right? So we'll talk about that as well a little bit. Okay, so this is something I want to talk about before we get into um, the other topics. Okay, so why talk about mental health, right? That is another question. Why should I talk about mental health? Do we talk about physical health every now and then? There are a lot more sessions happening on physical health compared to mental health, right? Everywhere.
Someday this mental health is also connected to your physical health.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the overall health, the way WHO, World Health Organization, defines is a combination of your physical, mental, social, spiritual health is what put together becomes your overall health, right? But I got to tell you, being in this space for over 7, 8 years now, I have understood that your mental health can start affecting your physical health, right? If not attended to in the long run, right? Yeah. So that is the way we see it, right? So to me personally, I see mental health as a lot more important over physical health. I'm not saying we should ignore physical health, no more walks, no more going to the gym or whatever, or diet or whatever. All of that is equally important. But then we should start paying attention to mental health a lot more, and we'll talk about why all of that is so important. We'll during the session we'll uncover some of those aspects as well, right? So
I would like to take half minute.
sure,
This is very important topic,
sure.
which I wanted to share my experience. I was having a acidity problem and I went to almost 3, 4 hospitals all over India. And do the endoscopy. This is, you are absolutely fine. I don't know why your stomach is bloating and you are having the acidic problem. So I went to a doctor in New Alipur, Mr. Ghosh. Mrs. Mohanka told that, why don't you go to Dr. Ghosh? So when I went there, he said, what is your problem? I said, sir, this is the problem. I am having acidic problem and nobody is able to treat me. So he said, where are you working? I said, Tega industry. Bola, acha, Mohanka. So he has prescribed a medicine to reduce my stress level. And he says, you will be okay. And honestly speaking, I was not having the acidity problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanjeev, for sharing this. In fact, I think this is one of the items which I will cover in the symptoms slide. And I think it's very important to understand because today a lot of things we don't even pay attention to, right? Again, it's all going back to lack of awareness, right? My presence here to clear that, right, and bring in awareness is what I'm going to by and large do this, right? So let's talk about, why talk about mental health is important, right? Because this is not a battle you want to fight alone, right? It's, as it is very hard to go through this challenge, right? When somebody is going through this challenge, right? And generally we don't want to talk about it. That is the, scenario here, right? And it becomes even more harder to fight this battle by yourself. So that's one of the most important reasons why we should be talking about mental health, right? One of the reasons why we are doing this session today here is also the same reason, right? So it's not a battle you want to fight alone, and you want to get the right help, everything what deserves to get back to better, right? And the other thing is, I said I'm so excited about this because, when I come and talk about this topic here today, right, I'm sure there is some of you have to have some effect of this topic to you personally because somebody has gone through it or you've gone through it, right? And again, this is something applicable to all of us, right? While a lot of us today can say, hey, I'm not stressed out, right? But then what is important to understand is all of us will go through stress in our lives, right? At some point, we will have to encounter it, right? When, how, in what form, fashion it will come, we don't know, right? And I'll give you some of the examples when I first encountered stress for myself, right? For example, I was in my, mid 40s, right? First time, again, I've encountered stress throughout my life, right? I'm generally a very anxious person, okay? Growing up, right? I used to play for my school cricket team, right? Next day, inter-school cricket match, the previous night, I just can't sleep. Very common, right? I know, very common, but I used to think I'm only going through because most of the time what happens is when you're going through this challenge, we all believe it's only me I'm going through, everybody else is okay. Because we don't talk about it, right? So that becomes a bigger challenge. So the point is when we start talking about it, right, we are doing a couple of things. We are normalizing it, There is no more stigma, no more taboo around this topic. Right? That's the only way to break the stigma, break the chain. Right? We all need to talk about it, make it sound as if I have a broken arm, I have a toothache. Right? We don't even blink to say those things, right? So can I say, I don't know, I'm feeling little, overwhelmed today. Something is going on in my head. I don't know. I can't just put my fingers to it. Something is bothering me. Can we start having those kind of conversations, right? It's only when we start talking about it, a lot more people will normalize it and then start discussing and talking about it themselves as well, right? So that is one of the most important reasons why we should talk about mental health, right? Of course, right? I don't know how many of you know that's one of the huge issue which is related directly to mental health, right? In terms of people committing or attempting, right? So I think the last number as of 2022, globally, we lost over 800,000 people to suicide, and India alone accounts for almost close to 1,65,000, right? For every one attempt of, one person letting their life go, there are 20 people trying to attempt suicide, right? So it's such a, uh, a nasty number. I don't even want to talk about it, but then unfortunately, facts are facts, and we should know the facts, right? So it's very hard, right? Can you imagine somebody doing or going to that extent, which means that I can tolerate my physical pain, but I can't tolerate my emotional pain, which I'm trying to address through a physical pain of taking my own life. Right? So that's what people do, right? So it's very important to create awareness, right? In terms of, I know it's a very tough topic, and I know all of you are, I can see the faces, right? Suddenly, all have become very sad. It's okay. The idea is we are taking the right step today here to talk about these things so that, we are trying to eliminate the stigma and taboo around these topics, right? Eventually, we all need to get to a point where, we can help people who are going through some of these challenges as well, right? And finally, it is also important, right, in the mental health spectrum, so that we can create a lot more case studies, we can create a lot more, like, again, similar to physical, I'm going to do a lot of comparison on physical health, right? There are a lot more case studies, a lot more comparisons, a lot more data, right? So when we know that, a lot of studies have talked about, over 50%, over 60% of people in corporate will go through some challenges in their lifetime. But then I have a strong opinion, it's not 50, 60, it's 100%. All of us will go through some challenge. Right? And going back to my first very stressful challenge, I talked about the anxiety. So obviously I had all these spouts of, various issues, right? But then it didn't affect me mentally to a great extent, right? It used to be there, and after the cricket match is over, I'll feel normal, which is what we all do, right? But then the first time when I really felt it affected me was when I lost my father to cancer, right? It was in 2015. Okay, very hard. I was very close to my father, and he was probably my, role model. In fact, a lot of his qualities is what I have, acquired, looking at him growing up, right? So it was very tough for me to go through, seeing him, the pain he went through for 8 months and finally passed away. And I went through the same issue what Sanjeev talked about was acidity. It's called stress-induced acidity. That is a technical term they use when you go through some mental challenge. This one was particularly to do with acidity. So we'll talk about when we jump into this next slide, or a few slides from now, we'll talk about how it can affect our physical health to a great extent. Okay, so we'll talk about that, right? So before that, I'm quoting this study, right? This is from SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management. Folks from HR background will understand what SHRM is. One of the largest HR body globally available, right? So they did a study recently, one of a kind of study, right? This study was never done before, and they did it in India. What they looked at 3 industries, right? They looked at finance and banking, IT, ITS, and travel and hospitality. They looked at 3 industries. They collected data from over 2,200 or 2,100 employees, right? In terms of trying to understand, we talk about stress a lot, right? We talk about mental health a lot. But basically, what does it do to organizations? We want to understand that, right? That is what the study was all about, right? So what they found, So you see this little red is basically loss in crores, and this average number blue is the average number of employees in those industries, right? So what they found was, in a finance and banking, for an average size of 5,000 employees, the company is losing 105 crores every year due to productivity challenges caused by mental health. Okay? That's probably the highest. The other two industries are very similar numbers. I just want to put this number so that you can get that in perspective in terms of why it is so important today. Right? And of course, the WHO has predicted that annually the current productivity loss is $1 trillion. The global loss due to mental health globally is $1 trillion. I don't even know how many zeros are there in 1 trillion. Okay? So that's a number globally if you want to compare that, right? So this is a study I'm quoting here, right? The study was called as the stress toll. The toll each organization is paying today because of mental health, right? So again, I'm trying to make sure we kind of understand the importance of mental health at workplace, right? With that, let's talk about how does it affect us today, right? Anybody wants to talk about how it affects us, mental health? Sanjay talked about acidity a little bit. Anybody else?
Sometimes we become angry.
Okay.
That is one of the causes because of the mental health. Your mind is not in control, so you become angry, you will shout. So finally, going down your physical health.
Okay. So one of the other way it affects us is getting angry, basically saying our mind is not under control, and because of that, one of the behavioral challenge we all go through is getting angry. Stress. Okay. Stress is the overall, stress affects us. Anybody else?
And scientifically, there is a breathing problem starts.
Ah.
That is there.
Okay.
I have already gone through breathing problem will start.
Okay.
So you'll find the protein and this will start.
Yes. It leads to some of the physiological challenges. Oh, by the way, when you talk about breathing, I got to be honest with you, right? Normal, when we're all sitting here doing what we do on a daily basis, we barely, fill our lungs with 20% of oxygen. So, I would strongly recommend, incorporate some serious breathing exercises in your day-to-day activity, right? And we'll talk about how we can do that as well. But then, again, if one takeaway you all have is this, that, implement some breathing, because by default, the way we breathe, it's very shallow, right? And I'm not going to get into the details of why, right? If you don't breathe well, what happens in the long run, right? So it's important, right? It's very important. So we'll talk about that as well, right? Anybody else has a different perspective of how does it affect us? Sorry? You isolate yourself, absolutely.
So I will just add to what Kaushal said. You isolate yourself and then you isolate your family also.
Brilliant. Excellent point. Right. So, there are several ways. We talked about some physical related challenges. We talked about some, behavioral related challenges in terms of how it affects. But let's look at a lot more details about what are some of the most common symptoms we all experience when we go through stress, right? So we have bucketed that into 4 buckets: physical, psychological, behavioral, and cognitive, right? So we'll kind of go into each of these buckets and see what happens when we go through stress, right? On the physical side, while it's most common, but it's also the least of what we are aware when it affects us, right? So I'll give you my own personal example here. Before I came into this line, and I'm, again, not that I know so much about mental health doesn't mean that I don't go through stress. Obviously, I also go through stress, right? So for me, the most common physical symptom is my muscles around my neck and shoulder, right, this area, will get really tight. And for the longest time, and I used to think the way I slept the previous night, maybe the pillow was too low or too high, or I slept in a certain posture which is causing this muscle ache for me, right? And I used to do the same thing like Iodex lagao or move lagao, whatever, or pop in some muscle relaxer pills if it's too severe. without knowing that I am going through some stress which is affecting me, right? So I got to know now, the moment I know this tightness happens either in the shoulder, neck area, which is what happens to me. It could happen in any part of your body, anywhere. It could, for example, some people will have lower back stiffness, right? Or some people could have some other muscle related issue throughout any part of their body, right? So that was something I learned, as to why it happens. So a lot of us don't even realize that these kind of issues are related to stress, right? The other one is, of course, the migraines, headaches, your heartbeat increasing. It's all very common, but then a lot of people don't relate migraine headache also to stress, right? In fact, there's a study done in UK, London. What they found is over 70% of people who visit a general physician complaining about minor aches and pains and cough, cold, viral, the underlying factor for all of them is stress, right? So even when you look at your immunity, that can get affected because of stress, right? So next time you look at any of these symptoms, ask yourself that question, right? Little checkpoint. Something going on with me, something bothering me. What is this, right? I may want to check one more time before I decide that it is actually a physiological symptom and not affecting me on a psychological level, right? So that is why it is very important to check some of these things, right? Insomnia, sleeping related challenge, right? It's probably the most largest. 1/3 of global population today suffers from insomnia. What is insomnia? Not able to fall asleep or not able to stay asleep. Long day, tiring day. Thinking is, I want to go get a good night's sleep, right? I go hit the bed at 10 p.m. Next 3 hours, turning, twisting, all kind of thoughts going through my head. Just not able to fall asleep. Somehow, after 3 hours, I managed to fall asleep. And within 2 hours, again, I am awake. Several of us would have, experienced this, right? But then we don't really tie this back to stress. Sleep is directly connected to stress, I got to tell you, right? And I think we'll talk about, in the one of the things takeaway, we'll talk about sleep as to why it is important and what it does to us, right? Very interesting. Stomach upset. It's called as irritable bowel syndrome in the medical terminology, IBS. Okay? Have you all heard about it? Okay. A lot of us have experience also, right? For example, this is a classic example, okay? Me coming here and delivering a talk to, 100 plus people and a lot of them online, right? How do you feel? Public speaking, how do you feel about it? Yeah. And by the way, 7 out of 10 CEOs dread doing public speaking, right? As a CEO, one of the most important aspects is to speak in public to their employees, to the market, to the analyst. But then 7 out of 10 CEOs have declared that that the most dreadful work they do is public speaking, right? So obviously, it's very stressful, right? So one of the things which happens is, there is a phenomena in our body which kicks in called fight or flight. Have you all heard this phenomena, fight or flight? Okay. Not too many science students here, I guess. All are science students? Okay. All right. You bunked that class on that particular day, I guess. Huh? Right? So fight or flight is a phenomena which has been in existence in us from our cave days, right? When we used to live in cave, jungles, right? Before the, evolution began. So what does this fight or flight do? Basically, it alerts our system saying that there is some danger around us or happening to us. Be prepared. Either you fight the danger or you flee, right? So because when we started, we used to live in jungles, caves, and there could be a lot of wild animals. If a leaf is moving, it is moving because of the breeze or because there's an elephant or a tiger or a snake, right? So that is how that trigger used to help us survive, right? It's a good thing, good phenomena. Even today, it happens to us in several ways where it prepares us to meet with certain dangers, right? But unfortunately, it triggers a lot of times for false reasons as well, right? And by the way, fight or flight in the long run is not the great trigger for us, because it kind of introduces a hormone called cortisol, which is not good for our overall physiological health, right? It could cause heart related conditions in the long run. Okay, but coming back to fight or flight, right? That is what happens when we are encountering a stressful situation or a danger, right? So what is the body brain? There is a stressful situation for Saravanan. He has to go and deliver a session for next 75 minutes to 100 plus people, right? And I'm thinking, oh my God, yeah, it is very stressful. What if I screw up? What if I say wrong things? What if I blah, blah, blah? All these thoughts are going through my head, right? And then what are the physical symptoms you encounter, right? Your mouth goes dry, your hands are trembling, shaking, all of these are happening. Have you all experienced it? I used to experience a lot in my school days. We used to have little, collect the news for that morning from the newspaper, bring 4 headlines, write it down in a piece of paper, and go on the stage and read. I used to shake. And looking at our vision, it affects everything. Okay? So what is our brain telling at the time of danger, right? In the real danger, it's saying, I need to give Saravanan all the access to get through this situation, right? So for example, there's a lion here, and I need to, obviously my brain is going to say, no, you can't fight lion, you run away from lion, right? So it's giving me all the oxygen, the blood circulation, everything I needed in my legs and my arms, my eyes, so that I can effectively run, and faster I run, better for me, right? That is what my brain is telling me, right? And it is not thinking about, oh, you had a lavish breakfast this morning, I need to go and take care of that, broke into pieces, make sure all the nutrition. Irritable bowel syndrome happens because anytime something's sitting in your stomach at that point of time in a stressful situation, the first thing the brain does is flush them out. I don't need to waste my energy, resources towards that. I need to focus on more important things, right? So that is why physiologically we all experience irritable bowel syndrome, right? Including running to the bathroom to pee also, right? Think about all the stressful meetings you had, important meetings you had, or anything for that matter, right? That is what our brain will do in a stressful situation, right? Of course, menstrual cycle disruption is also a big reason because of stress, right? Again, a lot of people don't even relate to it, right? They kind of talk about, oh, this is our